The field hospital was nothing more than a canvas tent set up on blood-soaked soil. The sound of mortars thundering in the distance rattled the ground beneath the cots. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, sweat, and iron. Nurse Eleanor Hayes moved quickly between wounded men, her hands steady though her heart pounded. She had seen war before, but this night felt different. The air was heavy, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Outside, screams echoed, followed by frantic gunfire. She tried to block it out. Her duty was here, among the broken and dying. Yet, as she leaned over a soldier gasping for breath, she heard something that froze her to the core. A whisper. It wasn't the soldier speaking, his lips never moved. The whisper drifted low, chilling, right into her ear. "Help me." She spun around. No one stood behind her. The other nurses were across the tent, too far to have spoken. The wounded man grabbed her wrist with sudden strength. His eyes, once clouded, flared wide open. "You hear them too, don't you?" he rasped, before collapsing back, lifeless. Eleanor staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. A cold draft swept through the tent though all flaps were closed. The lanterns flickered. Somewhere outside, in the din of war, she thought she heard crying. Not the cries of the wounded. Not men's voices. But the faint weeping of a woman. And it was getting closer. The gunfire outside slowed, replaced by an uneasy silence that felt heavier than the battle itself. Eleanor sat near the cot of the soldier who had just died, her hands trembling though she tried to steady them. Nurses weren't supposed to break, but something about his last words clung to her like a curse. "You hear them too, don't you?" She tried to push it from her mind, busying herself with bandages and morphine. Yet every time she looked at the flaps of the tent, she felt eyes watching her. At last, stepping outside for air, she was struck by how eerily still the night had become. No distant artillery. No shouting. Just the moon hanging low, casting pale light across the battlefield. The ground was littered with helmets and rifles, shadows twisting between craters. Then she heard it again. The crying. Soft, sorrowful, drifting through the smoke like a lullaby gone wrong. Her chest tightened. Against every instinct, she followed the sound. Past the rows of stretchers, past the makeshift supply station, until she reached the edge of the tree line. And there she saw her. A woman. She wore a long, white nurse's uniform, though it was tattered, dirted, and soaked through with blood. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. Her hair hung long and dark, swaying though the air was still. The woman stood among the trees, head bowed, cradling something in her arms. Eleanor squinted, her pulse hammering. Was it a child? A wounded soldier? "Ma'am, are you lost?" Eleanor called out, her voice breaking. The figure slowly raised her head. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed endless. She opened her mouth, not to speak, but to wail. The sound was piercing, echoing across the battlefield like a siren of grief. Eleanor stumbled back, clutching her ears. When she looked again, the woman in white was gone. But the crying hadn't stopped. It was now all around her. From the trees. From the empty foxholes. From the broken radios crackling faintly in the dirt. Whispers rose with it, dozens of voices overlapping, whispering her name. "Eleanor? Eleanor." Her knees buckled. She ran back toward the tent, heart racing, the battlefield no longer a place of men and guns, but of ghosts. Eleanor burst back into the medical tent, chest heaving, hands shaking as she clutched the entrance flap. The other nurses looked up, startled. "You look like you've seen a ghost," one muttered, half joking. Eleanor didn't answer. Her gaze darted from cot to cot. Some of the wounded men were restless, twisting under their blankets, mumbling in their sleep. A few had their hands over their ears, as if blocking out some unbearable sound. She moved to one of them, a young private with a chest wound. His eyes flew open as she approached, wild and bloodshot. "She was here," he croaked. "The crying woman. She walks between us at night." Eleanor froze. Before she could respond, another soldier 2 beds away sat up suddenly, his face drenched in sweat. "She touched me," he whispered hoarsely. "Said my name. Said it was my time." The lantern overhead flickered violently, shadows dancing across the tent walls. The air grew icy cold. And then, the radio crackled. It hadn't worked in days, its batteries long dead, but now the speaker hissed with static. A faint voice bled through, female, distorted, yet chillingly clear. "Help me. Help them." The men in the tent stirred, panic spreading like wildfire. Some shouted, others prayed. Eleanor's hands gripped the radio, but the voice only grew louder, overlapping itself into a chorus of weeping. One soldier suddenly thrashed, screaming, "Get her away from me!" He clawed at his blanket, eyes fixed on the corner of the tent. Eleanor followed his gaze. And saw her. The woman in white. Half hidden in the shadows, she stood motionless, her head tilted unnaturally, eyes locked on Eleanor. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The weeping filled the room anyway. The wounded men began convulsing, their wounds reopening, blood soaking through bandages as if the battlefield itself had followed them inside. Nurses screamed, rushing to hold them down. And then, just as suddenly as it started, silence. The woman was gone. The men collapsed back onto their cots, trembling but alive. The radio clicked off, dead once more. Eleanor staggered back, her heart racing. She couldn't deny it anymore. The battlefield wasn't just claiming bodies. It was holding souls hostage. The night stretched on with no rest. Even when the guns outside started again, the thunder of artillery felt less terrifying than what Eleanor had witnessed. She couldn't shake the image of the woman in white. By dawn, Eleanor sought answers. She found Captain Morris, the officer in charge of the camp. His face was pale, worn down by too many sleepless nights. Eleanor hesitated, then spoke. "Captain, have you heard of a woman? A nurse? On this battlefield?" Morris's eyes hardened. He lowered his voice. "You saw her, didn't you?" Eleanor blinked. "You mean, you know about her?" He nodded grimly. "The men call her the forgotten nurse. They say she served here in the last war. She stayed behind when her unit retreated, refusing to abandon her patients. When the enemy advanced, the hospital tent was shelled. No one survived." A chill ran through Eleanor. "Then how, why?" Morris stared at the ground. "Some say she never left. That she wanders the battlefield, still trying to save the dying. Others claim she lures men to their deaths, unable to tell the living from the dead anymore." Eleanor's mind raced. The woman she'd seen hadn't seemed malicious, just broken, sorrowful. But the soldiers' wounds reopening, the radio's cries, could grief alone hold such power? Later that day, while tending to a young soldier with a mangled leg, Eleanor caught him staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "You're not her, are you?" he whispered. Her blood ran cold. "Her who?" "The nurse who walks at night. She stood right where you're standing. Smiling at me. But her hands, they were covered in blood." Eleanor forced a calm smile, finishing the bandage. But inside, fear gnawed at her. If the men couldn't tell her apart from the ghost, how long before she, too, became part of the legend? That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor stepped outside. The battlefield stretched before her, a graveyard under the stars. She whispered into the stillness, "Who are you?" For a long time, nothing answered. Then, faintly carried on the wind, came a voice. "My name was Margaret." The trees swayed though the night was windless. A lantern at the edge of the camp guttered out. And from the shadows, Eleanor thought she saw her, the woman in white, standing at the tree line, watching. But this time, she wasn't crying. She was smiling. The jungle night was unnervingly quiet, save for the occasional distant boom of artillery. Eleanor stood frozen near the tree line, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold air. And there she was. Margaret. The ghostly nurse in white, her blood-stained uniform glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her face was pale, beautiful in a tragic way, her hollow eyes locking onto Eleanor's. This time, she did not vanish. Summoning all her courage, Eleanor stepped forward. "Margaret," she whispered. Is that really you?" The figure tilted her head, as if the name stirred something deep within her. Slowly, she stepped closer, her feet leaving no imprint on the soil. With every step, the air grew colder. Eleanor's lantern flickered, its flame bending toward the ghost as if drawn by her presence. When Margaret stopped just a few feet away, Eleanor could finally see her clearly. The blood soaking her dress wasn't fresh, it was old, dried, almost black. Her hands trembled as she clutched at invisible bandages, as if still tending to soldiers who weren't there. "You stayed behind," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "You died here. But why are you still here?" Margaret's lips parted. At first only a faint whimper escaped, but then the words formed, soft as wind through leaves. "I couldn't leave them, they needed me, they're still calling for me." Her voice cracked, shifting between sorrow and anger. "But they don't listen anymore. They scream. They beg. And I can't save them." Eleanor's heart ached. She could see the torment in the ghost's eyes, an endless duty with no end, no peace. "You're hurting them," Eleanor whispered. "The men in my tent, they think you're still here to help. But you're tearing them apart." Margaret's expression twisted. Her hollow eyes burned with sudden intensity. "They should not leave me. No one leaves me." A blast of icy wind surged through the camp, extinguishing every nearby lantern. The tents shuddered as if struck by a storm. Eleanor staggered back, shielding her face. When she looked up, Margaret was gone, swallowed by the shadows. But her voice lingered, echoing across the battlefield like a vow. "They are mine. And soon, so will you be." Eleanor's knees buckled, her breath ragged. She understood now, this wasn't just a ghost clinging to the past. Margaret had become something else entirely. A spirit of war itself. And it wanted her. The following nights were unbearable. Every time darkness fell, the soldiers in the ward writhed in their sleep. Some screamed for mothers long dead. Others clawed at their wounds as if invisible hands tore them open again. And always, the weeping. Margaret's weeping. Eleanor couldn't take it anymore. She gathered a small group of men, those still strong enough to walk, and whispered her plan. "We can't let her keep tormenting you. If she thinks you're her patients, she'll never stop. We have to confront her." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, but desperation overrode their fear. One corporal, his arm bound in a sling, muttered, "Better to face her than to keep rotting in our beds." That night, under a thin sliver of moon, they set out. Eleanor led the way, clutching a lantern and a small Bible she had found in the supply chest. She wasn't a religious woman, but right now, she needed faith in something, anything. They moved toward the old bomb crater the captain had once pointed out. "That's where the hospital tent was hit," he had said. Now, its ground was barren, a scar in the earth. As they approached, the lantern sputtered, casting long, warped shadows. The air thickened with a smell like iron and smoke. And then, Margaret appeared. She stood in the center of the crater, her uniform soaked in spectral blood, her hands outstretched as if welcoming them. Her hollow eyes glowed faintly, catching Eleanor first. "You brought them back to me," she whispered. Her voice cracked into a sob. "I knew you would." The soldiers froze, trembling. One began to back away, but Margaret's head snapped toward him. "Don't leave me again," she shrieked. The man collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, gasping as if his heart were being crushed. Eleanor rushed forward, shouting over the wailing wind. "Margaret! Stop this! You don't belong here anymore." The ghost's face twisted between sorrow and rage. "I belong here. This is my ward. My men. My war. If I leave, who will save them? They're gone." Eleanor cried, tears stinging her eyes. "The war took them long ago. You can't save them anymore, you're only trapping them. You're trapping yourself." For a brief second, Margaret's form flickered, her face softening, almost human again. But then the cries of phantom soldiers rose all around, agonized voices, disembodied and desperate. Their howls pulled Margaret back into her torment, fueling her fury. She screamed, the sound splitting the night. The lantern glass shattered, plunging them into darkness. Cold swept over them like a wave. The soldiers clutched their rifles, but what good were bullets against the dead? It was Eleanor, standing firm in the crater, who raised the Bible high and shouted with everything in her. "They're not yours anymore." The earth shook. The voices rose. And Margaret's eyes locked onto her with burning hatred. "You will never take them from me." And then, with a flash of ghostly light, the battlefield became a war zone once more, phantoms of the dying surrounding them, and Margaret at the center, leading the charge. The battle for souls had begun. The crater roared with phantom cries, echoing as if the battlefield had awakened from the dead. Eleanor and the soldiers stood surrounded by ghostly figures, half-seen men clutching at invisible wounds, their hollow eyes pleading. At the center stood Margaret, glowing faintly in her blood-stained uniform, her arms outstretched as if commanding the dead. "Do you hear them?" she cried, her voice carrying across the chaos. "They are still suffering. They need me. They will always need me." Eleanor's heart hammered, but she forced herself to step closer. "No, Margaret. They needed you once, but that time is over. You can't heal them anymore. You're only keeping them in their pain." Margaret's face twisted, torn between sorrow and fury. She advanced, her feet gliding over the ground, eyes burning brighter. The soldiers raised their rifles in panic, but Eleanor snapped, "Don't shoot. It won't stop her." Margaret reached toward Eleanor, her ghostly hands trembling. "Then stay with me," she whispered. "Be my helper. Together we can tend them, forever." The thought chilled Eleanor to the bone. She could feel the weight of the dead pressing in, voices whispering around her, "Join us. Stay. Never leave." But she shook her head, gripping the Bible tight. "You're not helping them, Margaret. You're holding them hostage. Let them go. Let yourself go." For a flicker of a second, Margaret faltered. Her expression softened, her hollow eyes filling with something almost human, regret. The phantom soldiers around them groaned, their outlines flickering like smoke. Eleanor pressed harder. "You gave your life for them. That sacrifice mattered. But you don't need to keep suffering. You can rest. You deserve peace." Margaret's lips trembled. The battlefield grew still, the cries of the dead dimming. But then, as if torn by two worlds, she screamed, her form twisting violently between shadow and light. "You don't understand," she wailed. "If I leave, they'll be gone forever." Eleanor stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. "Margaret, they want to be gone. They want to rest." She held out her hand, not in fear, but in compassion. For the first time in decades, Margaret hesitated. Slowly, shakily, she reached for Eleanor's hand. Their fingers touched, cold as death, but trembling like a wounded child's. And then, the phantom soldiers raised their heads. One by one, they whispered faint thank yous, voices softer now, free of pain. Their forms began to fade into the mist. Margaret's face crumpled, tears running down her pale cheeks. She looked at Eleanor with a broken smile. Maybe I can rest now. Her figure began to dissolve, light scattering into the night. The crater grew still, silent, as the last echoes of war faded away. But just before she vanished completely, Margaret's voice whispered in Eleanor's ear, soft, almost gentle. Take care of them, the living ones. Don't let them be forgotten. And then she was gone. The soldiers fell to their knees, gasping, the heavy pressure lifted from their chests. The battlefield was silent once more. Eleanor stood alone in the crater, her lantern rekindling itself as if by unseen hands. She clutched it to her chest, her heart heavy yet relieved. Margaret was finally gone. But her warning, her plea, still echoed in Eleanor's soul. The dead had been freed. Now the living were hers to protect. The dawn after the confrontation was unlike any other Eleanor had seen. For the first time in weeks, the camp was quiet, not with the silence of dread, but with the peace of release. The men slept without screaming. Their wounds, though still painful, no longer reopened in the night. The air itself felt lighter, as though the battlefield had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. Captain Morris found Eleanor near the medical tent, staring toward the crater. He studied her face, the exhaustion etched in her features, and spoke carefully. They say the nurse is gone, he said. That you ended it. Eleanor shook her head. I didn't end anything. She chose to let go. Morris's gaze lingered on her. Still, the men believe it. They're calling you the nurse who faced the dead. Eleanor looked down, unsettled. She hadn't sought glory, only mercy, for the living and the dead. Yet perhaps this was how legends were born, not from victory, but from bearing witness to the unbearable. Later, as the soldiers prepared to move camp, whispers spread among them. They say she talked to the ghost. They say the forgotten nurse finally found peace. No, they say she's still watching, making sure no one's left behind. Eleanor listened in silence, unsure whether to correct them. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe Margaret's story, tangled with her own, would live on as a warning and a comfort. That evening, when the camp was quiet again, Eleanor stood once more at the edge of the crater. The ground was still scarred, but now it felt empty, no shadows, no whispers. She whispered into the fading light. Rest easy, Margaret. I'll remember them. I'll remember you. The wind stirred softly, almost like a sigh of relief. And then it was gone. Eleanor returned to the tent, her lantern glowing faintly in her hand. She knew the war would bring more wounded, more dying, more souls on the brink. But she also knew something else. Margaret's plea would remain with her. Take care of the living. Don't let them be forgotten. And so, in the chaos of war, Eleanor walked forward, no longer just a nurse, but a keeper of memory. The story of the nurse on the battlefield would echo through the years, passed from one soldier to another, growing into legend. A reminder that even in the darkest nights of war, compassion could outlast death itself.